This video looks at the subject of contingency planning, including the recent changes in Sanction Interpretation 3. One of the critical requirements in IATF 16949, defined to help ensure continued supply to the customer, is 6.1.2.3 in IATF 16949, titled Contingency Planning. Since IATF 16949 was first issued in 2016, there have been a number of changes to the requirement through Sanctioned Interpretation number 3. The latest change was made in July 2021 and became an auditable requirement in November 2021. So now, before we get into the detail of the changes, can you quickly explain the principle of sanctioned interpretations?
The sanctioned interpretation, or the SI, officially alters the published requirement. So this is normally based on changes that affect the automotive industry globally, user feedback, experience. The IATF do periodically review and issue these SIs, these sanctioned interpretations that officially alter an IATF requirement. And by the way, these are always available free to download from the IATF website in the IATF languages.
And I've seen through the sanctioned interpretations now that sometimes the transition time is different. The amount of time that the organization has to review and implement any changes. In the case of this sanction interpretation, there seems to be a longer transition period. Is there any particular reason for that?
Yes, that's a good point. And you're right, in this case, the transition time has been defined as 6 months, whereas some others are much shorter kind of transition or effective dates. And I think the reason for this in the case of SI3 is because the changes are more significant and will take more time for the organisations to review, plan and implement within their QMS.
That makes sense. So maybe these recent changes to Sanction Interpretation 3, can you just give us an insight about what some of those changes are?
So, and again, this isn't going to come as a surprise to anyone, but over the last 2 years, we've faced the global COVID-19 pandemic and has caused big losses to people and communities, and obviously it has resulted in disruptions in the automotive supply chain. And IATF have kind of added pandemics into the list of topics. It wasn't something that was on everyone's radar a couple of years ago, but obviously it has a more significant meaning right now. So they added that to the list of topics that an organisation has to address and consider when they develop their contingency plan.
Yeah, and I guess, they can do a lessons learned on the experience of the last 2 years with COVID-19, that if we are hit with any future pandemic, then they are better equipped to deal with that as part of the lessons learned.
Absolutely. Okay. And in a way, Paul, IATF would do exactly the same as well. They also are responding to this pandemic in the way many other organisations are having to. And I think everyone can benefit from reflecting on what went well and what didn't go well, so that can impact what happens next time. Not that we want another global pandemic.
Yeah. Okay. So on top of pandemics, then, what are some of the other changes that have been introduced through the sanction interpretation?
I guess the other major update links to cybersecurity, and this was already referred to in the contingency planning requirement, but it has over recent time gathered a greater focus, and we've seen many examples around the world of organisations suffering from cyber attack. So it's important from an IATF point of view that organisations are managing that potential risk, and that forms part of their contingency plan, and they have appropriate reactions to the risks that cyber attacks could present to their organisation, and as such impact their supply chain and their customer.
Yeah, and I understand the theory of that, But I'm sure what some of the listeners would like is, is there any practical examples about what organizations might do to raise the awareness of employees, for example, about potential cyber attack? Is there any practical examples?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, one of the problems that we have here is we have such a broad range of organizations that are IATF certified. So we have companies with not very many employees to companies with thousands and thousands of employees. And so each of those types of organization will have different approaches to IT. And some of those risks will be addressed by an organization's own IT processes, or they may have outsourced some of that to an external organization. As an example, it could be releasing of phishing emails to see if employees observe suspicious emails and do not open the attachments. If they do, this would have to be analysed and the relevant improvement actions. Again, with outsourcing, the key thing there is the selection of the outsourced organisation, because again, that could introduce additional threats unintended. And obviously there are certification schemes like ISO 27001. Again, organisations can choose to adopt to give themselves, their customers, and other interested parties confidence that they are managing risks around cyber.
Good. So I guess to sort of summarize that part of the discussion then, that IATF are not prescriptive about how we do this testing and simulation, but it could be things like phishing email and see how many people respond to those and then taking the relevant action to reduce the risk. The final thing I want to discuss then is the additional requirement, including the contingency plans, the development and implementation of appropriate employee training and awareness. Why do you think that has been added to the contingency requirement?
I think the intent of this is almost to emphasise that it's not just about documenting the risk through the contingency plan, but it's also about describing how those risks are going to be managed. And I think we know that communication, training, development, that will help manage the risk. And again, in many organisations, there will be training modules or e-learning modules available to help employees understand what they can do to prevent any potential cyber security threats.
Okay, thank you very much, Niall, then, for the input on contingency plans, including the recent changes to Sanctioned Interpretation 3. So, as discussed, there have been some significant changes in the contingency planning requirements in IATF 16949, including preparing how to deal with potential disruptions caused by pandemics like COVID-19, implementing systems to prevent or minimize the potential for cyber attack, and the regular testing of systems to determine their effectiveness. And then finally, more emphasis on training the relevant employees in how to deal with issues that could affect supply of product to the customer. Any IATF 16949 certified organization needs to have reviewed the changes in the Sanctioned Interpretation 3 and also have implemented any changes to their system, and in particular, any changes in their contingency plan by November 2021.